everyone, welcome to the third of 3 lessons on using master pages to create digital planners and journals in Affinity Publisher for iPad. In this lesson, we're going to use some of the same methods we used in the last one to create the open version of our planner. We're going to begin by setting up our shapes, and we'll follow it up with textures, shadows, and highlights for dimension. Now, if you're able to join us for the live premiere, I'll be in the chat answering any questions you may have about master pages. If you weren't able to join, please feel free to ask any questions you may have below, and I'll be happy to answer them there. Are you ready? Let's get started. Just like the closed planner, I want to make sure that I create this open background on a master page so that I can apply it to the majority of my planner and easily change it whenever I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and select the open background master page. Remember, it's always a good idea to actively select either the content page or the master page that you want to work on before you begin adding anything, just to make sure that you're in the right place. Now, this is going to include the open book and what will end up looking like stacked pages that are bound in the middle. As I mentioned in the last video, I'll be creating a separate one showing you how to make the binder rings for the inside and out, but I also wanted to provide you with this option. I'll also be creating separate master pages for the tabs and show you how to stack them inside this one. Again, that will be a separate lesson. Once I'm done creating everything, I'm going to save it as a template so that whenever I want to create a planner, I can just decide if I want to have bound pages or binder rings. I can make aesthetic changes, and I don't have to start from scratch. If you recall the first in the series about master pages, I set the guides up for my open planner to take into account the tabs I'm going to have along the side, as well as the top, the papers themselves, as well as either the binding or the rings in the middle. Now in this case, I'm not going to add a piece of wood to the background because I want the majority of the space to be taken up by my book. I want working space, and only the corners will be peeking through where I round them off. There's no sense in adding to the overall size of my planner by adding texture that's not going to be seen. I'm just going to grab my rectangle tool. I want to make sure that snapping is on. I'm going to use the lighter brown color from my palette because that will show shadows very nicely. And I'm just going to drag out a rectangle that covers the entire canvas. Now, before I lock that in place, I'm going to go ahead and select it, duplicate it, and I'll change it to this red color, the same color as the closed planner. I'm going to turn that off for right now. I want to rename this one background, and then I'll go back to the layers, swipe right, and lock it in place. I'm going to turn this one back on. Again, I'm not going to scale this down, but I am going to round off my corners. So I'll make sure that my rectangle tool is selected so I have its contextual menu at the top. I'll go up to the top and choose round. Now I had chosen 3% for the closed version, so I'm going to do the same thing here. Once that's in place, I just want to make sure that those corners are locked in place. So with it selected, I'll tap Convert to Curves. I've renamed this cover, and again, I'm going to lock this into place just so as I'm adding things inside of it, I don't move it around. Now with those two in place, I want to create the paper stack. I'm creating this for this layout, but I'm also going to be able to use it with the binder rings, and when we get to that lesson, I'm going to show you how you can quickly adjust it for that layout. Now, one thing I want to do before I move forward is change the color of my guides because when I set them up with a red color, which is now blending into my background. So I'm going to go up to the top here, go to the right and choose Guide Settings, and I'll change the color of these to white. When I set my guides up, I set it up so that the main writing area, my top sheet, will be between the blue margins. The rest of the stack, which is there purely for aesthetics, is going to be between just outside of that margin and this first white guide here. So I'm going to make sure my snapping is on. I'll grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to use this off-white color for my paper, and I'll drag out a rectangle between those blue margins, and snapping makes that really easy. Now normally I add shadows at the end, but in this case it's going to make the next step a lot easier. So I want to actually have shadows coming out on either side of this, but a little bit more on the right side, just the way the rest of the planner is going to be. So with that selected, I'll go to my FX Studio. I'm going to toggle on outer shadow and tap to get the contextual menu. And I'm going to bring the radius up to about 5 pixels. That's going to bring it out a little bit on the right side, but it's also going to bring it out a touch on the left. What I want to do is start dragging my radius up so that you can start seeing it. And I'm probably going to end up changing this, but for right now, about 35 pixels is fine. To create this stack underneath that, I'm going to duplicate the first rectangle 4 or 5 times. It really just depends on how detailed you want to get, specifically how many sheets you want to add to give the appearance of depth. I usually stick with the less is more philosophy because it's really just giving the impression of a stack of papers. No one's actually going to be counting the number. I'll select the top paper and I'm going to hold my finger down to get the quick menu and just duplicate this 4 times until I have 5 within my layer stack. Now you can see that as I did that, that built that shadow up and it's really dark, but we'll take care of that once we're done getting these set up. I want to name this top layer top paper just so I can keep track of it. That's always going to be the one that stays inside of the margins. For the rest, I want to take this last one and I'm going to pull it out to this white part, this white first white guide on either side. And I kept snapping on for that, but I'm going to turn snapping off now because what I want to do is make sure that I pull the rest out so they're not quite perfect. If I do it too perfectly, then it's not going to look realistic because no pages, especially in a bound book, are going to be equidistant from one another. So I'm not going to be precious about this. I'm just going to start grabbing them, the turn, snapping off. I want to make sure that not only do they not match within the stack, but they don't match either side either. So I'm just going to drag this out to maybe there, pull this out a little further away, and then this one maybe I'll bring to right there. I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing, but I don't want to do it the same exact way. So again, I'll grab this one, and I think this time I'm going to bring it a little further away. Maybe bring this one to there, and this one right here. This is looking good, but I want a little more control over the shadows that are coming out at the top and the bottom. Because again, those are all the shadows stacked on top of one another. And I'm not able to diffuse them the way that I am here because they're all sitting in the exact same space. So what I'm going to do is take all of my papers above that last one, and I'm going to clip them inside. And as I do that, you're going to see that they lighten up significantly because now the only shadow is the one that's on that last paper. In fact, what I want to do is actually add a second one to this one that comes down to the bottom. I need to have a shadow at the top because I want to have some shadows showing on the tabs that I add there. But in this case, I want to add a little bit more at the bottom. I'm not going to have any content there, and adding a little more shadow is going to add to the aesthetics of it. So with that selected, I'll go to the FX Studio. I'm going to select that initial outer shadow, and I'm just going to tap the plus sign to add it. I want to bring this down here until it's almost touching the edge. And I'll just take a look at the top here. I think that's fine. And because I brought it straight down, it didn't add anything to the sides. So those both look okay. The only thing that I want to do is make sure that both of these have scale with object on so that if I scale this up and down, it doesn't change my shadows. With those in place, I'm going to start adding my texture, shadows, and highlights. I'm going to temporarily turn off my guides there because I don't really need them right now. I want to add the same fabric texture to my binding that I did the closed cover. So I'm going to go to my layer stack and I'm just going to tap there. I'll hit place from files and I'm going to grab that fabric 122. I'll go ahead and drag it out over the canvas. I want some of those little knots showing. I'll go ahead and clip this inside of that cover. And I'm going to change the blend mode again to overlay. And remember, I didn't change the opacity on the cover, so I want to keep it the same here. I'm going to add my textures and my effects at the same time. So with that cover selected, I'm going to go to the FX Studio and I want to add a drop shadow to this. So I'm really going to pay attention down here because again, I want everything mainly going down and to the right. So with my FX Studio, I'll turn on the outer shadow, tap to bring up the contextual menu. I'm going to drag this down to the right, and I'm just going to drag up the radius. And sometimes it'll be a little bit slow, especially on an iPad. So you might not see it right away, but when you release these sliders, you'll see it. So I think I might bring the offset in just a touch. I need to add a shadow at the top, but not quite as much. So I'm going to go back to that layer, make sure it's selected to my FX. And with that selected, I'll tap the plus sign and this time just bring it up to the top left a little bit. I'm going to add additional shading in the middle here in a moment, but before I do that, I want to make sure my cover's selected, and I'm going to toggle on 3D in that same FX, and I'll go ahead and tap to get the contextual menu for that. Now, once again, you can see that my highlights are over here on the right side, and I need them to be on the left. So at the bottom, I'm just going to tap until I have azimuth and bring this up, and it should be about 135. I need to soften this a little bit because, again, this is fabric. So I'll go ahead and tap until I get softened, bring that up, and tap again to get specular and bring that down a little bit. And I think the radius is fine at 5 pixels. I think I might just bring this just up a touch though. There we go. I want to bring in the band that I have on the front cover and make it look as if it's sitting on the cover itself, not being used between the pages, but sitting here on the cover, because if I didn't, it wouldn't make sense to have it on the outside. So I don't need to start over. I'm just going to go to the master page for my cover. I'll select that layer. I'm going to hold my finger down and hit copy. Go back to this master again, make sure you're tapping to select that. And I'll select the cover and then paste. Now, because this is the entire canvas, this fabric band isn't quite big enough. So I'm going to set it in the middle. I want to make sure that snapping's on. And then what I want to do is with my command controller, I'm going to hold down the command key and drag this up, and it's going to drag it equally on both sides. Now, in this case, obviously I can't have it go off the edge. So I'm going to have it go to the edge so that the highlight is still seen. And I'll do the same thing down here at the bottom. I do think I'm going to end up changing the color of this. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. I'm going to hold down Shift just to keep it where it's at. Move it to right about there. I want to change this to a different color. So I'm going to go to one of my other palettes here. And I think I'm going to change it to something like teal, maybe. I like that. So I'll pick that color. Let me add this to my other swatch palette just so that I have it available. So I'll find that Planner iPad series, add current fill. So I need to go back to this master page. Before I forget to do it, I'll select this and change that. So that's all set. That's how easy it is to change something with a master page. So if I had this tied to a page, which I do, it's automatically going to change it there. I don't have to go into the individual page and do it. So let me go back to that other master page. I have my fabric band in place. I have my shading in place and my 3D effect. What I want to do is add some shading in the center here to give it the impression of creases where the book has been opened and closed at the spine. Now again, these are going to be non-destructive, so I can make adjustments or remove them when needed. I'm creating this on a master page so that I can opt not to use them when I duplicate this layer to create the one for the binder wings. Now, instead of using the gradient tool, which I don't have as much control over, I'm going to use a series of shapes. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the paper for right now. Now you can see that Publisher automatically provides your center line there when you have a 2-page spread like this or when you're spreading it out across the thing. So I have a nice guide there. If I wanted to, though, I could turn my guides back on. In fact, I think I will because I want to keep what I'm adding between here. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and that red color, and I'm going to drag out a rectangle that is within the white line at the top and the blue margin at the bottom because those are both pretty close to the edge. I'm going to change the luminance value of this, and to very quickly do that, I can just drag down on the color dot. I want to make this a rounded rectangle, so I'll go ahead and round that off. And I'm actually going to change this to 50%. And what I want this to do is look like a shadow that's going to be behind the papers. So I'll go to my FX Studio, and the first thing I'm going to do is just bring the Gaussian blur up. So I've turned on the Gaussian blur. I'm going to go ahead and drag this up. I don't want it to be completely gone. If I bring it too far, it goes too far out. I want it to have some structure. So bring it right about there. So that's about 86 pixels. And I want to make sure it's clipped inside the cover just to keep everything together. I'm also going to clip it underneath the texture just so that the texture gets applied to it. I think I need to bring the color down just a little bit more. And I'm going to change the blend mode to linear burn. No, I think I'm going to bring this back to multiply. But I'm going to bring the opacity down So that's part of the reason that I brought the color down a little bit, the luminance. Now I can always play with this if I need to. Let me just turn the paper back on just to see how it looks. I think I might need to bring this up just a little bit. Again, there's not much being seen because my papers take up most of the space. With that in place, I want to add some shadows and highlights on either side of that to give the appearance of a crease. And I'm going to do that with the pen tool. So I'll select the pen tool and I need a stroke. I'm just going to start out with black just so it can be seen. And I'm going to set it to about 6 points. I'll tap at the top, and with my command controller, I'm going to hold down on shift. That's going to allow me to tap out a nice straight line. And I want to duplicate this twice. So I'm going to hold 2 fingers down and just drag. I could also use the quick menu. In fact, sometimes that actually works better. For some reason, it's not working great. I'll hold shift down to keep this straight. And I want to keep them pretty close together. And then I'll just power duplicate that last one. So I'm going to create the one side and then duplicate it for the other side. For these two on the outside, I want those to be gray. So I'm going to choose the mid-tone gray. And for the one in the middle, I'm going to make that white. So for the white one, I'm going to make sure that my blend mode is soft light. For these two, I'm going to change them to linear burn. Now, obviously, these don't look much like shadows and highlights because they're not quite blended. So I want to do the same thing I did here. I'm going to take those, and first I'm going to bring them down underneath the texture. I'm going to clip them inside the cover. That way I can see how the texture is impacting it as well. With them all selected, I'm going to go to the FX Studio, toggle on Gaussian Blur, and tap to get the contextual menu, and just start dragging this up. I don't want to go too far. Again, I still want there to be structure. I think I'm going to bring it to right about there, but maybe for the highlight, I might go a little further. Nope, too far. Let's go right there. Again, I want to make sure that scale with object is on all of those. I don't need to start over here. I'm just going to select them. I'll hold my finger down and duplicate. I'm going to use the shift on the command controller to drag this straight across to the other side. And I think I'm going to set both of these out a little bit. So I'm going to take these three and move them out just a touch to right about there. I'm going to turn the paper on before I make any other changes just to see how it looks, because I could turn the opacity down on these, but I just want to make sure that I need to do that. And I think in this case I do. So I'm going to take at least the ones that are set to linear burn, and I'm going to bring the opacity down just a touch. I don't want it to be distracting, but I do want it to be seen. So I think that looks good right there. Let me just turn my guides off. Sometimes it's easier to step back. Again, these are non-destructive. They're just shapes, so I can always change them if I need to. But for now, I'm going to call these done and move on to the shadows for the binding. Right now, my pages are a bit flat and I want them to have the appearance of being bound in the middle and therefore slightly rounded towards the center of the book. I'm still going to work non-destructively so I can easily turn the shadows and highlights off, but in this case, unlike the cover, I am going to use the gradient tool to create them. This is completely to taste. There are no right or wrong settings on the levels you set your shadows to, and I will say this is one of the trickier effects to make work because it can end up being distracting. But it's a good alternative when you want to do something other than binder rings. Now, while there aren't set levels, I do want to show you steps that I take to try and make the gradient look more realistic. I'm going to go into my layers and duplicate this top layer. So I'll hold my finger down and duplicate, and I'm going to rename this Crease. And I want to clip this inside of the top paper because I don't want the gradients that I'm adding to go out on either side or up towards the top or bottom. I'll grab my gradient tool and I'm going to start from the left side. I'll hold shift down to drag a straight linear gradient all the way across. Now it's added yellow because it starts with the color I began with, which was that off-white, and then drops the luminance value. I am going to change the colors in a moment, but for now I want to create 5 more color stops in between these two to create the soft gradient from the deep crease in the very middle to the pages on either side. I'll start though by changing this to linear burn. That's going to give me a better idea of what I need. I'll go ahead and tap to add one in the very middle, and then tap to add 2 on either side. So I'm going to start out by using hex colors to set the colors themselves, and then I'm going to use my HSL sliders to make more subtle adjustments to the colors I laid down. I'm going to start on either side first. These two are going to be turned off completely. So this one I can actually start with the HSL sliders. I'm going to bring the luminance up to 100% and the opacity down to 0. And I'll do the same thing here. So I'll bring this up and the opacity down. And it's going to push all of that yellow into the middle. For this first one on the very left, I'm going to go up to my colors and choose the hex sliders here so that I can tap and key that in. This is going to be F2, F2, F2. Click OK. This one is going to be A, 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 A. The center one is going to be darker. This is going to be 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. And then I'm going to go the same numbers but the opposite direction. So this is going to be AA, AA, AA. And then this one will be F2, F2, F2. That looks hideous, I know that, but I'm going to go ahead and make some adjustments to this. So the first thing I want to do is go to my HSL sliders. I'm going to go here to the middle, and let's start with the center one. I'll tap to make sure it's selected. And I think I'm going to bring the luminance down just a little bit. I want this to be the darkest, but again, I don't want to go all the way down because I don't want this to look like it's too deep. So I think I'll start here at about 30. I can always change it. With this one, I want to go ahead and drag this out a little bit to here, and I think bring this one down. Now I need to lock this in a little bit more. So I'm going to bring these mid sliders really close to the center so that the gradient isn't pulling out too much. And you can see it's creating that nice crease there. I'm going to bring this one to right about here, bring this in, and I'm just sort of softening this up. This right here is sort of creating a highlight, and it's actually not going to be the same distance on either side. So let me bring this in just a little bit. Because again, just like the two sides of the book here and on the other side, it's not necessarily going to be equidistant. It's not going to look realistic if you do that. Again, I'm just adjusting these until I feel like there's no harsh lines there, and the mid-tone sliders help with that. So I might bring this back out a little bit. Soften that up, maybe pull it in. And what I want to do is go to my layers, and I'm going to bring the opacity to 40%, maybe a little higher. Let's go up a little higher. I want to adjust these a little bit more. And I feel like maybe this could be a little bit lower. So what I'm going to do is actually select this layer. I'm going to go to my FX and then styles, and I'm going to create a style out of this just by going up to the top and add style from selection. That way, if I need to create this on another page, I don't have to start all over again, because if I were to just turn this off for right now, I'll go ahead and copy this again. And then with that selected, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. With that selected, I can go ahead to my styles here, tap to add that, and it automatically adds those effects, that gradient. I don't need to start all over again, so I have this for future planners. I'm going to call the crease done. Again, it's completely non-destructive, so I can always adjust it if I need to. I can move some of those color stops if I feel that they're getting distracting. Again, there's no right or wrong as to how you create this. If you want to create a crease like this, just play around with the settings until it looks right for the planner that you're creating. Now, one thing you'll note, I never added any texture to the paper, and I don't tend to do that because this open background is the one that tends to get duplicated the most. If I add texture to that paper, that texture is then going to get multiplied by however many duplicates I create of the content pages, and that's just going to make for a very large file. But again, that's entirely up to you. Just keep in mind, if you do decide to add it, you want to make sure that you're doing it in such a way that you don't make such a large file you can't compress it easily. So we have our starting point for our planners, and we're ready to begin giving it more character and add our content. If you have any questions about what we've covered in these lessons covering the master pages, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Coming up in the next 3 lessons, I'm going to show you how to create inner and outer binder rings, the tabs for the planners, as well as vintage-inspired book plates, a leather spine cover, and a snap. We'll be using Publisher for the most part, but we're going to start exploring Studio Link to jump into Designer as well. If you're not already following the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you always know when I publish new content, as well as schedule live premieres. I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks for watching.